First, we need to know that this entire 1962 debacle, why exactly it happened. 1962 was a precursor to what started in 1965, what we call as the Cultural Revolution. So, the Chinese Communist Party, in its CPC of 1962 itself, had decided on the Cultural Revolution that they were supposed to begin in 1965. So 1962 war was actually a compulsion for China to give a physical punch so that all the Chinese citizens would lose pride in the Indian religious practices and customs, especially the Buddhism, which is, as we know, that India influenced many religious practices across the border within China. So, in order to finish off all the religious stuff, they had to first give a physical punch so that the pride is lost. And then they started a brutal cultural revolution within China, finishing off all the religious and festival, all those kind of practices, which were all basically Indian subcontinent influenced one. Uh, you will realize that Hu Shi, the ambassador of China to the United States several years before 1962 commented that India has culturally, dominated China uh, for centuries without firing a bullet across. So, in order to finish off the India influenced religious practices, they had to do this 1962 stuff to justify to its people that you don't need to keep any kind of pride with the kind of practices that you follow, the traditions that you follow, which are India influenced. And then in 1965, the brutal cultural revolution started. So this is the background. This was their internal requirement for starting the cultural revolution, that they had to fight with the Indian army. Now, after that, there's some exception like Vietnam. Otherwise, you have never seen this particular Chinese PLA fighting any real war. And in fact, even at the LAC standoff, you see that when push came to shove on the nights of the week ending August from the Indian side, the PLA stunningly retreated. As a result, India occupied several high positions at the face of value. So this was a second loss of face for the Chinese after the Galwan debacle. And we also saw what happened in Arunachal recently. So there is not one country that does not want to see an India-China war. But if any of these two countries are intent on war, there is no one stopping them. China generally does not attack a prepared enemy. And why would it delay if it wanted to war with India? Like, let India prepare, cancel out, or toughen the winning probabilities by the sheer strength of numbers that it has? It just makes no sense. So I believe that this no weapon use policy, despite all the conflict that we have at the LAC and the physical tussle that both the forces face off with each other, the no weapon use policy still continues. So that agreement is still on, and PLA also keeps maintaining that no weapon use policy. Now, when a country does not have some bare minimum of democratic values, it isn't a surprise. The majority of its security has to concentrate inwards rather than outside. Now, when they boil up the borders all across with the neighbors, it's more of a conflict within the Chinese Communist Party in order to cater to those requirements that these borders are all fired up. Now, the Chinese PLA is not a battle hardened force with any big war experiences and does not have any kind of operational records to showcase, except for the arm twisting of the armless citizens inside China. You also know that the Chinese forces are made up of 70% of the single child of their parents. So single children are considered not only pampered but also unfit for army jobs for psychological reasons. So even psychologically, the PLA men do not match the physiologically the average vital statistics of the armed forces of most countries in terms of, if you check the height, weight, and the physical endurance. So you'll find that in the Himalayas they will have to go with the oxygen tanks and etc. Now many of them cannot sustain at the heights of Tibet or the Himalayan winters, even for a football match without a regular oxygen supply. Forget about a war. Now with massive unrest within China and anti-CCP sentiments in various pockets of China, it is very likely that in an event of war, the parents of this single child army men would implode the country from within, which is exactly why no parent would want their only child sacrificed for the cause of strengthening a political party instead of a nation. This is the only army which is aligned to a political party, not the nation. So all PLA members are Communist Party members, not a surprise. And it is something unfathomable for armed forces any country of the world to have complete alignment with a political party. So what this also implies that the promotions in the forces are at the mercy of loyalty and allegiance to the party leaders rather than being based on merit or military capability. This is one of the most suicidal features of the Chinese army in a war scenario, because if the generals give up, the men would follow. Even they will lay down their arms. So the generals of PLA, you will find that they are transferred more frequently than any other armed forces in the world, because these transfers are ordered at the whims of the party without any military cost benefit calculations on the decision. Now, this literally stems out from the political requirements of the leaders in power to keep control continuing rather than for any military betterment objective. So you find that the PLA is not immune to the purge, which the so-called chairman for life, Xi Jinping, is rolling out. He initiated the so-called reform of the PLA as a tool for the purge of top generals, whom he doubted to be against his policies. An armed force involved with the political or business ambitions of a few in the governance is a disaster, because their control alignment with particular factions would impact the performance at war. So the dependence of several army generals on separate political factions and heads sitting in Beijing for making battlefield decisions is very dangerous. So you never know which faction in the army could be interested in losing the war. So this is all internal CCP conflict playing out in open. This is exactly why they would never go for a war. And the Chinese army has a few bilateral friends to actually boast of. It is a pariah in the parlance of joint war exercises with modern forces or the powers of the world, particularly the West. It is not allowed to mingle and kept in total isolation from the command and control or the operational insight uh, of the modern warfare. Perhaps this can be attributed to the lack of trust factor of the Chinese polity among the Committee of Nations, barring Pakistan, North Korea, and little crumbs of the Russian military experience sharing. The PLA stands home alone. So they do not have this bonhomie or modern tactics learning exercises with major nations of the world. About 20% of the total training time of the PLA goes into learning communism of Lenin and Karl Marx. So domestic political compulsions of aligning the PLA with the party are costly beyond doubt. Even the countries where Lenin and Marx belong don't do this to their forces. And the quantity of toys and men does not work on the actual battlefield. It is more about the fight in the men, which is a qualitative aspect.